June 17, 1962, 11:42 p.m. Neutral zone, near the eastern edge of the Rocky Mountains. Former state of Colorado. The man was already bleeding when they dragged him into the headlights. His hands were tied with radio wire. His boots were gone. Every step on the gravel made him gasp. A German officer in a gray-black uniform stood calmly in front of him, gloves clean, face without emotion. Behind them, the mountains were dark and silent, as if they were watching. A truck idled nearby. Its back doors were open. Inside were crates marked with the Black Eagle of the Greater Nazi Reich. The prisoner looked at the officer and said one sentence. "It's true. Germany didn't have to win. They were just ready to." The officer raised his pistol. A shot echoed into the mountains. And the man fell. How did this world come to this? Before we go any further, understand this. This story was not meant to be told. And if you are here, listening, it means you are one of the few who still want to know the truth. We are a new channel. We do not have power. We do not have money. All we have is stories like this, and people like you. If you want more stories that feel forbidden, forgotten, and dangerous. If you want to help this channel grow from nothing, please subscribe. Your support is the only way these stories survive. They said the war ended in 1946, but no one alive in 1962 believed war had ever truly stopped. Germany won because it moved faster than anyone expected. In 1943, their jet fighters ruled the skies over Europe. In 1944, they broke the Eastern Front. In early 1945, they used a weapon no one thought they had ready, an atomic bomb, and dropped it on Washington, D.C. The American government collapsed in 1 week. The president-elect, Franklin Delano Roosevelt Jr., was assassinated before he could even be sworn in. The U.S. Army split apart. Some units surrendered. Others disappeared into forests and deserts. Japan never faced atomic fire. Hiroshima and Nagasaki still stood. Instead, Japan ruled Asia, the Pacific, and the western half of North America. By 1962, the world was divided. Europe and Africa belonged to the Greater Nazi Reich. Asia and the Western Americas belonged to the Empire of Japan. The old United States was broken in two. East and Midwest under German control. West under Japanese rule. The Rocky Mountains became a lawless scar between them. Hitler was dead. His face still hung on walls. But his successor, the Führer's chosen, promised something worse: one empire, one world, one order. For Americans, life meant silence. In German lands, Americans were marked on papers as former citizens. They could not vote. Could not own land in cities. Could be searched, beaten, or shot for suspicion. In Japanese lands, they were called occupied people. Watched. Limited. Always one mistake away from prison. Resistance existed. But quietly. In whispers. In films passed hand to hand. In people who disappeared. One of those people was named Thomas Reed. He lived in what used to be Pittsburgh, now called Reich District 12. He worked in a rail depot owned by the Reich Ministry of Transport. Every morning, he showed his papers. Every night, he went home to a narrow room in a building where Germans lived above and Americans lived below, like a rule written into stone. Thomas was 33. He had been 12 when Washington burned. His father had been a radio operator in the U.S. Army. After surrender, his father vanished. No body. No record. Thomas grew up learning to lower his eyes. But he never learned how to forget. In the depot, he loaded crates onto trains heading west, weapons, machines, sometimes people. He did not ask what was inside. Questions were dangerous. One morning in March 1962, a crate broke open. Inside were books. Not German books. Not approved ones. English books. Old ones. American ones. A guard noticed Thomas staring. "Close it," the guard said in German. Thomas closed the crate. That night, when the guards were distracted, he pulled one book free and hid it under his coat. It was burned at the edges. The title was half gone. But inside was a photograph. A city celebrating. American flags without swastikas. Soldiers smiling next to British and Russian troops. The caption said, "Victory Day, May 1945. Thomas's hands shook. This world in the book was not supposed to exist. 2 days later, a man knocked on his door. The man wore a depot uniform like Thomas. But his eyes moved differently, always watching, always measuring. "You took something," the man said quietly. Thomas froze. "I saw you," the man continued. "I don't care about the book. But others do." Thomas waited to be arrested. Instead, the man handed him a small metal box. "Inside is a film," the man said. "If you want to understand what you're missing, watch it." Then he left. That night, Thomas watched the film in total darkness. It showed a world where Germany lost. Where Berlin burned. Where Americans walked free. Where his father might still be alive. When the film ended, Thomas sat in silence for a long time. He knew something now. And knowing was dangerous. 3 days later, the depot was raided. German security police, black coats, silver skull pins, stormed in before dawn. Men were lined up. Papers checked. Faces studied. The man who gave Thomas the film was dragged out. He did not scream. They never found the film. But someone had talked. Thomas went home that night and burned everything he owned except the film. He waited. 2 weeks later, another message came, written in chalk on a wall near the tracks. "West. If you want answers." Thomas quit his job the next day. No one stopped him. Americans quitting did not matter. He traveled by foot and stolen rides. He crossed Reich land where Americans bowed their heads and Germans walked tall. He saw camps near old cities where people went in and did not return. In Ohio, he saw smoke rising from a village marked unproductive. He kept walking. Near the edge of the Rockies, he met a woman named Elena. She had once been a schoolteacher in Kansas. Now she moved medicine and messages through the neutral zone. "Nothing belongs here," she told him. Not Germany. Not Japan. Not even truth. They traveled together. They saw villages with no flags, only guns. They saw men wearing no uniform but acting like soldiers. They saw bodies hanging from trees with signs that said, "Spy," or "Thief," or nothing at all. In a ruined church, Elena showed him another film. It showed Japanese cities after surrender, a version that never happened. It showed Hitler dead by his own hand, a truth their world hid. "Someone is making these," Elena said. "Someone wants people to remember what was possible." They called him the archivist. No one knew his face. But his films moved through borders like ghosts. German and Japanese officials hunted him without success. One night, soldiers came. Not German. Not Japanese. Men in dark coats with no symbols. They took Elena. Thomas ran. He never saw her again. He reached the western side weeks later, Japanese-controlled California. There, Americans bowed to Japanese police. He found a resistance cell hiding in an old theater. They watched films in silence. Some cried. Some went numb. The leader, a man named Ishida, told Thomas the truth. "The archivist is not trying to win a war," Ishida said. "He is trying to prove that it never had to be lost." Thomas offered his film. They copied it. They sent it east. Weeks passed. Then news came, the archivist was dead. Or betrayed. Or both. The film stopped. And the world grew quiet again. Thomas tried to leave. He was arrested at a checkpoint near Nevada. The officer looked at his papers and smiled. Former citizen, the officer said. Suspicious travel. They took him into the mountains. To a road where trucks waited. To crates marked with black eagles. To a man with clean gloves. That man asked one question. Who showed you the other world? Thomas said nothing. They broke his fingers. He said nothing. They showed him Elena's scarf. He said nothing. Then they told him something new. Your father lived, the officer said. He died last year in a labor camp in Africa. He asked for you. Thomas looked up. That was when he said it. It's true. Germany didn't have to win. They were just ready to. The shot came after. In this world, history books say there was never another way. They say Germany and Japan were destined to rule. They say resistance is criminal madness. But in secret rooms, people still watch old films. They whisper old names. They remember men like Thomas Reed. And they ask the most dangerous question left. If the world once could be different, why can't it be again? The truck that carried Thomas Reed's body never stopped. By dawn, the crates were gone, and so was every trace of blood. The road looked clean again, as if nothing had happened. In the Reichsrecords, Thomas Reed would be listed as relocated for labor service. That phrase covered everything from mines to graves. But stories do not die as easily as men. 2 weeks after Thomas was killed, a girl named Ruth Keller watched a film in a basement beneath a burned-out library in St. Louis. She was 19. Her mother had been German. Her father had been American. That made her something the Reich did not like to define. She worked as a cleaner in a government office where maps of Africa were drawn and redrawn as if the land itself were a puzzle. The film she watched showed a city called New York without banners. It showed crowds cheering soldiers who were not Nazis. It showed a man speaking into a microphone saying the words, "We are free." Ruth did not cry. She felt something colder than sadness. When the film ended, the man who ran the basement, an old printer named Jacob, said, that copy came from the West. From a man who died in the mountains. Ruth asked his name. Jacob said, Thomas Reed. She memorized it. 2 days later, Jacob was arrested. The basement was sealed. The films were gone. Ruth went back to cleaning offices where Germans spoke about Africa like it was empty land. She listened quietly. She learned names of trains, ships, and camps. One night, she wrote everything down. She hid the paper inside the hollow leg of a chair in her room. She waited. In July 1962, the new Führer gave a speech in Berlin. He spoke of final stability. He spoke of the end of division. He said Japan would soon accept German leadership for global order. In Japanese lands, officials said the same speech meant war was coming. People felt it before they understood it. Soldiers moved more often. Trains ran at night. In the neutral zone, gunfire became louder. Ruth decided to leave. She packed nothing but the paper from the chair leg and one stolen film she had managed to hide during Jacob's arrest. She traveled as an American laborer, head down, voice quiet. Outside Chicago, German police stopped the bus. They searched bags. They took a man who was reading English poetry. They did not take Ruth. She crossed into the neutral zone with a group of traders who paid with bullets instead of money. There, she met men who called themselves free, but acted like kings. She met women who carried knives like prayer beads. She heard stories of the archivist. Some said he was dead. Some said he had become many people. Some said he had never existed, only his work did. Ruth found a camp hidden in pine trees where rebels trained. She showed them the paper. It listed supply routes from Reich Africa to Europe. It showed where prisoners were taken. It named officers. One man looked at it and said, "This could start a war." Ruth said, "There is already a war. You just pretend it ended." They decided to move the information west, into Japanese lands, where spies were everywhere and trust was rare. Ruth traveled with a man named Haru, a Japanese officer who had turned against his own empire after his brother vanished in a camp in Manchuria. He did not speak much. But he watched everything. In Nevada, German hunters followed them. In Utah, neutral zone raiders tried to sell them to the Reich. In Arizona, Japanese patrols nearly caught them crossing an old highway. They lost 2 people on the way. 1 to bullets. 1 to thirst. When they reached San Diego, Haru brought Ruth to a quiet house near the sea. Inside were machines printing films. Not many. But enough. Ruth gave them Thomas Reed's story. She gave them her paper. She gave them her film. They copied everything. They sent it north, south, east, west. They did not sign names. They only added 1 sentence at the end of every film. They were ready to win. By autumn 1962, whispers returned. In factories. In schools. In camps. People said there was proof now. Proof that the world they lived in was not destiny, only speed, fear, and timing. The Reich responded with fire. Entire blocks in Detroit were erased after films were found. In Africa, villages were burned because someone had watched. In Japan's lands, Americans disappeared faster than before. And yet the film spread. Not fast. Not loud. But steady. Ruth never saw the results. She was arrested in November while trying to cross back into the neutral zone. No trial. No record. Just another name erased. Years later, historians in the Reich would write that resistance ended in 1962. They would say the archivist myth collapsed. They would say the people accepted order. But in secret notes, hidden in church walls, in tunnels, in graves, another history lived. A history of men like Thomas Reed. Of women like Ruth Keller. Of films that showed a world that never came, but almost did. In this world, people still argue. Was Germany destined to win? Or were they simply ready when others were not? No one agrees. And that is what scares the rulers most. Because as long as people can imagine another ending, this one is not safe.